On April 1st, 1807, a supposedly free man walked into the state of Ohio and was told his freedom cost exactly $500.
Right.
Which is, I mean, it's an absolute impossible fortune for that
Yeah,
era.
completely impossible.
Right. But then, a century and a half later, another man, a highly decorated pilot, was essentially told he couldn't leave the Earth's atmosphere for, the exact same underlying structural reasons.
It is a staggering juxtaposition when you lay it out like that.
Yeah. And, well, today is Friday, April 3rd, 2026. And the rights the listener, the rights you take for granted right now.
The digital and physical freedoms. Yeah.
Exactly. The freedoms you're exercising simply by listening to this audio, they were born right in the crossfire of those two extremes.
We're so conditioned, I think, to view history as this, neatly paved road behind us.
Right.
But the reality is just much more chaotic and, frankly, much more immediate than we like to admit.
Yeah. And that is exactly the premise of our deep dive today. We're exploring this really fascinating text called The Chronology of the Black Diaspora, an independence calendar.
A very specific text.
Very specific.
Yeah.
And what immediately grabbed me about this source is its incredibly restrictive scope.
Right. It's just 7 days.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't even attempt to cover a century in a linear way. It only covers a single week of the year, March 29th through April 4th.
But within those 7 days, the text spans over 200 years of history.
Right. Ricocheting from 1741 all the way up to 1984.
Which, I mean, that completely shatters the illusion of linear historical progression.
Yeah, it does.
By abandoning the standard chronological timeline and, grouping these massive global events by their calendar days across different centuries.
It forces you to look for the underlying mechanisms of change.
Exactly. You stop looking at when something happened and you start looking at how it happened. You suddenly see this mechanical through line between a colonial surveillance law in the 1700s and a digital privacy rights debate happening in a server farm today.
Wow, yeah. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because that's our mission today. We are not just going to read off a list of names and dates like some high school syllabus.
Right, nobody wants that.
No.
Yeah.
We are treating this text the way a software engineer treats the underlying code of an operating system.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, think of it like we're looking at the specific lines of code, the exact moments, the legal precedents, the cultural shifts that built the societal frameworks we interact with every single day.
The architecture of it all.
Exactly. And I really want to emphasize to you, the listener, why this matters right now.
Yeah, it's incredibly relevant.
Whether you're, commuting to a corporate strategy meeting, or you're just trying to make sense of the chaotic news cycle we're in.
Which is a lot to make sense of.
It really is.
Yeah.
But understanding how historical rights were actively demanded and theorized, well, it gives you the structural blueprint for the world of 2026.
Right, because the central thesis of the text is that an unexercised right is merely a suggestion.
Ooh, say that again.
An unexercised right is merely a suggestion. The frameworks of identity, sovereignty, civil rights, they weren't just passively granted by the system.
No, they were architected.
Exactly. And before any physical or legal battle can be won, someone has to build the intellectual framework first.
Right. You have to write the theoretical code that defines what freedom actually is before you can execute the program in reality.
You have to know what you're fighting for.
Yeah. And, well, it's highly appropriate that we are having this conversation today, April 3rd, because today's date is a massive node in this historical network.
A huge node.
On April 3rd, 1950, Carter G. Woodson, the man the text definitively calls the father of Black history, passed away.
Right.
But the text doesn't treat his death as an ending.
No, not at all.
It treats his entire life's work as this profound architectural mandate.
Well, Woodson is foundational because he deeply understood the mechanics of systemic erasure.
Yes.
In the early 20th century, the omission of Black contributions from global history wasn't an accident.
Right. It wasn't just an oversight.
Exactly. It was an active, highly curated process. It was built into the curriculums, the monuments, the political discourse.
The whole system.
Yeah. And Woodson realized that when a dominant culture controls the historical narrative, forgetting becomes the default state of society.
Wow. Forgetting is the default.
Right. Therefore, remembering is not a passive hobby.
No.
Remembering is an active, aggressive form of resistance.
So by us literally having this conversation in 2026, by analyzing this specific weekly calendar, We are actively executing Woodson's mandate.
We are keeping the cultural memory running.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, if you let the memory lapse, the structural integrity of the civil rights built upon that memory, it begins to degrade.
Yeah, it falls apart.
Woodson demanded an institutionalized memory, which is why he founded what eventually became Black History Month.
He was trying to build an infrastructure of remembrance that could outlast him.
It reframes the whole concept for me. It's not about knowing trivia, it's about maintenance.
Yes, system maintenance.
You have to maintain the structural memory. And the text traces that concept of intellectual maintenance all the way back to March 31st, 1797.
The death of Olaudah Equiano.
Right. The source dubs him the founding father of the Black Memoir. And, I'm familiar with his autobiography, but the text frames his writing not just as literature.
No, it's much more than that.
It frames it as a highly sophisticated weapon.
Well, we have to put Equiano into the context of the late 18th century Enlightenment.
Okay, set the scene.
You had prominent European philosophers actively constructing these pseudoscientific arguments about the inherent intellectual inferiority of African people. This wasn't just abstract racism. This was the foundational logic required to justify the transatlantic slave trade.
The legal cover for it.
Exactly. The entire global economic engine relied on the premise that the enslaved were less than human, incapable of high reason or emotional complexity.
So, if the economic system is justified by the assumption that a group lacks humanity, then simply surviving the system doesn't dismantle it.
No, it doesn't.
You have to attack the underlying philosophical premise.
And that is exactly what Equiano did.
Right.
His autobiography wasn't just a harrowing account of the Middle Passage and his journey to freedom. It was a devastating intellectual counterattack.
Using the pen as a weapon of liberation.
Yes. By mastering the English language, navigating the complexities of the British publishing world, and producing a work of profound literary and philosophical merit, he forced the oppressive system into a paradox.
Oh, I see.
The oppressors had to confront the undeniable intellect and humanity of a man they legally classified as property.
Because in that era, the personal narrative was the undeniable proof of reason and soul.
Exactly. He used his pen to systematically dismantle the social justification of slavery.
He literally wrote the line of code that said, "I am an intellectual equal," in a format the British public just couldn't dismiss.
He proved his humanity.
But this is where the calendar does something fascinating. It jumps from Equiano in 1797 to March 29th, 1981.
Right, marking the death of Dr. Eric Williams.
The father of the nation of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
And the text heavily emphasizes his groundbreaking book, Capitalism and Slavery.
A seismic text in the historiography of the diaspora.
The source says this book fundamentally reshaped the global understanding of the slave trade by forcing the West to admit that the Industrial Revolution was built directly on the backs of the enslaved.
Well, before Williams, the prevailing historical narrative in the West, the comforting story they told themselves,
Right, the myth,
was that slavery was abolished primarily because of a sudden wave of European moral enlightenment.
like we realized it was wrong, so we stopped it.
Exactly.
But wait, I'm looking at these two figures, Equiano and Williams, and I'm struggling to see the direct chain link the text implies.
How so?
Well, Equiano fought his battle in the 1700s using highly personal emotional storytelling.
Right.
And Williams fought his battle in the 20th century using cold, hard, macroeconomic data, looking shipping manifests and banking records.
He was looking at the ledgers.
Right. So one is a battle for the soul, and the other is a battle over the ledger. Aren't they fighting two completely different battles?
It's a really vital distinction you're making, but the text argues they are absolutely fighting the same war, just dismantling different pillars of the same oppressive structure.
Okay, break that down for me.
Equiano had to dismantle the moral and social justification of slavery in real time.
Yeah.
He had to prove humanity to a world that denied it. Williams, centuries later, had to dismantle the historical memory of slavery.
Ah, so Williams was attacking the comforting myth of the benevolent abolitionist.
Precisely. Williams looked at the ledgers and proved that the slave trade wasn't abolished purely out of the goodness of the imperial heart. Right. It was abolished when it was no longer the most economically efficient model for the British Empire, which had already used the immense wealth generated by enslaved labor to finance the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, wow.
So Equiano proved the humanity. Williams exposed the cold economics.
You really can't fully understand the architecture of the diaspora without both of them.
Exactly. You need the personal narrative to understand the human cost, and you need the economic blueprint to comprehend the sheer scale of the systemic motive.
That clicks into place perfectly. Equiano handles the philosophical entry, and Williams handles the economic reality.
Right.
But, an intellectual victory, no matter how profound, is ultimately just theory until it is codified and exercised.
Absolutely.
It's totally useless if the local sheriff won't let you physically walk down the street or into a voting booth.
Which naturally pulls us from the realm of the writers into the brutal reality of the legal battlefield.
Yeah, let's go there. Because the legal arena is where the theoretical architecture clashes violently with structural reality.
It's where the rubber meets the road.
And the calendar anchors this clash on March 30th, 1870, the ratification of the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Right, which officially forbade the denial of the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude.
Now, the author of this text draws a highly provocative line here.
Oh, very much so.
And just to be clear, we're impartially reporting what the source asserts here. The author argues that the 15th Amendment isn't just an artifact of the Reconstruction era. They assert it remains the active legal shield in the 2026 battles over digital voting protections, algorithmic voter purges, and, modern disenfranchisement.
It's a very compelling argument about the durability of legal precedent.
Yeah.
The 15th Amendment established the foundational principle that the mechanics of state administration cannot yield a racially exclusionary outcome. The author is tracing a direct legal lineage. They're saying the same constitutional logic used to combat physical poll taxes or literacy tests in the 20th century.
Right, the old methods of exclusion.
The exact same legal framework lawyers in 2026 are using to combat opaque algorithms that disproportionately flag minority voters for removal from digital registration rolls.
The technology changes, but the legal shield remains the same.
Exactly.
But the text doesn't dwell on the macro-level abstraction of the amendment.
Yeah.
It immediately drills down to the micro-level, to a specific individual acting the very next day.
March 31st, 1870.
Literally 24 hours after ratification, a man named Thomas Mundy Peterson became the first African-American to vote under this new law in a local election in Perth Amboy, New Jersey.
Thomas Mundy Peterson represents one of the most critical concepts in this entire calendar.
Which is?
The activation of a right.
Activation. I want to pause on that word. The text treats rights like dormant machinery.
Because, legally speaking, they are dormant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A law written on a piece of parchment, even an amendment to the Constitution, it's inert. It holds potential energy, but it has no kinetic force until a human being exercises it.
Oh, that makes sense.
When Thomas Mundy Peterson walked into that polling place in Perth Amboy, he wasn't just casting a ballot for a town charter revision.
He was physically activating the 15th Amendment.
Yes.
Yeah.
He forced the abstract theory of the law to manifest in physical reality. Progress, according to the text, only exists in the exact moment it is being exercised.
So without Peterson, or someone like him, willing to actually test the system, the 15th Amendment is just a theoretical concept.
Exactly.
And that connects beautifully to another date the text highlights. April 2nd, 1855, John Mercer Langston.
The architect of entry.
Right. The text dubs him that because he was elected as a town clerk in Ohio, becoming one of the first African Americans ever elected to public office in the U.S.
And notice the specific office.
Town clerk.
Right. The text is making a point about the mechanics of power here.
How so?
Langston proved that local representation, understanding the mundane, day-to-day machinery of governance, like property records and local ordinances.
That's the boring stuff.
The boring stuff. But that is the essential gateway to broader national power. You don't necessarily start by changing the federal government.
Right, you start by mastering the local terrain.
Yes.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the calendar throws a massive contradiction at us.
Right.
We have Langston winning an election in Ohio in 1855. But if we rewind the timeline just a bit, on April 1st, 1807, the text highlights something incredibly dark about that exact same state.
The Ohio Black Laws.
Right. Ohio, which was supposedly a free northern state, passed these restrictive laws. They required black residents to post a $500 bond just to prove their freedom and legally reside in the state.
A staggering sum of money.
Yeah, I mean, $500 back then.
In 1807, $500 was the equivalent of roughly $10,000 to $12,000 today, perhaps even more in terms of pure purchasing power for a working-class individual. It was a prohibitively astronomical barrier for someone escaping enslavement or trying to establish a new free life.
So help me map this out with an analogy. It's like being handed a valid ticket to a concert.
Okay.
The federal or state law says, you are a free person, you have a valid ticket to enter society.
Right.
But when you actually walk up to the venue, you realize the doors have been completely bricked up.
Yep.
The ticket is the theoretical law, but the bricks are the $500 bond. You are technically allowed inside, but practically, the structural architecture of the building denies you entry.
That is the exact definition of what the text calls structural exclusion.
Structural exclusion.
It is the insidious nature of conditional freedom. The law creates the illusion of entry, while the administrative state maintains impossible invisible barriers.
Oh, yeah.
And the author explicitly claims, again, impartially reporting the text here, they claim that this specific type of northern administrative exclusion using financial and bureaucratic hurdles rather than explicit racial bans.
Or because they couldn't just say no.
Exactly. The text claims this is the historical blueprint for the systemic exclusion that still haunts modern housing markets, zoning laws, and employment algorithms.
So instead of a literal whites-only sign, it becomes a you must have a $500 bond sign.
Right.
Which functionally achieves the exact same outcome, but allows the state to maintain a veneer of legality and fairness.
Exactly. And that is the defining tension of the legal battlefield in this calendar.
Push and pull.
Yeah. You have the constant push to activate rights, like Thomas Mundy Peterson and John Mercer Langston, constantly grinding against the state's endless invention of new structural exclusions, like the Ohio Black Laws.
It's an exhausting perpetual war of attrition.
Very exhausting.
Which honestly raises a terrifying question. If the societal frameworks, the local governments, the economic structures are expending that much energy to keep you grounded, confined, structurally excluded.
What do you do?
Exactly. How do you break out?
Yeah.
When earthly legal structures are a rigged game, what is the next logical move?
Well, according to the text, you change the axis entirely. You defy gravity.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes. You move the battle from the terrestrial courtroom to the stratosphere and into the absolute, undeniable visibility of the arena.
Let's look at the sky first, then. The text outlines this concept of airborne ancestry.
It's a beautiful concept.
It links two aviation milestones that I honestly wouldn't have naturally put together. First, on April 1st, 1918, during World War I, the Royal Air Force is officially established.
Right.
And the text specifically highlights that Caribbean pilots, like William Robinson Clark from Jamaica, integrated the RAF at its very inception.
This completely shatters another historical myth.
Which myth is that?
The assumption is often that marginalized groups were slowly allowed into advanced technological fields decades after they were established.
Like they came in later.
Right. But the text argues that the presence of Clark and others proves that Black technical mastery and courage were present at the absolute birth of modern military aviation.
Oh, wow.
They weren't an afterthought. They were foundational to the discipline.
And the calendar uses that as a chain link to jump forward to March 30th, 1962.
The Cold War space race.
Exactly. Captain Edward J. Dwight Jr. is officially recommended by the Kennedy administration to be the first African-American astronaut candidate.
Right. He was selected to enter the Aerospace Research Pilot School, which was the pathway to NASA.
So the text connects the early RAF pilots to the Tuskegee Airmen, directly through to Captain Dwight, and even draws a line to the Artemis missions in the 2020s.
Tracing the chain.
Yeah, but I want to know, what is the philosophical weight of breaking the stratosphere barrier? Why is this grouped in an independence calendar?
Because structural exclusion, by its very nature, is designed to keep marginalized people physically and economically tethered to the bottom.
Oh.
It's terrestrial oppression. You are restricted to certain neighborhoods, certain jobs, certain schools.
Bricked up doors on the ground.
Right. Therefore, mastering flight and specifically moving into celestial exploration is the ultimate physical and psychological rejection of earthly boundaries.
You're literally leaving the gravity of the oppressive system behind.
Exactly. An astronaut cannot be subjected to a local zoning law.
Sure.
It's a profound shift in the perspective of what is physically possible.
That is incredible. But, the text doesn't just focus on the sky. It brings us forcefully back down to Earth, but into very specific, hypervisible spaces.
The sporting arena.
Yes, it transitions from the stratosphere to the arena. We have three vastly different sports titans highlighted here.
Titans is the right word.
First, March 31st, 1878.
Hmm.
The birth of Jack Johnson in Galveston, Texas.
Ah,
He becomes the first African-American world heavyweight boxing champion. The text describes his unapologetic brilliance and says he completely defied the Jim Crow expectations of submission.
the author identifies Jack Johnson as the spiritual ancestor of modern main character energy in Black culture.
I love that phrase.
It's perfect. He drove fast cars, dated who he wanted, and flaunted his wealth and dominance at the absolute height of racial terror in America.
Right. Then we jump over a century to April 2nd, 1984.
Coach John Thompson.
Yes, leading the Georgetown Hoyas to win the NCAA men's basketball championship.
Yeah, huge moment.
The text states he shattered the leadership glass ceiling, redefining the black man not just as an athletic participant, but as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar athletic machine.
They specifically cite his Big John energy.
Yeah, his energy on the sidelines.
He moved the representation from the labor on the court to the executive directing the labor.
And finally, a global pivot to March 29th, 1962, Sir Leary Constantine,
A fascinating figure.
a legendary Trinidadian cricketer who was eventually knighted. But the text focuses on his role as a statesman,
Right.
noting that he fought the color bar in the UK
Yeah.
and even helped establish Britain's first racial equality laws. The text calls him a precursor to the modern athlete activist.
So we have three vastly different arenas: boxing, basketball, cricket, spanning over a century.
Right, but I need you to synthesize this for me.
Sure.
We just spent 20 minutes dissecting Olaudah Equiano's Enlightenment philosophy and the systemic legal mechanisms of the 15th Amendment.
Right.
In the grand scheme of liberation and civil rights, why does dominating a boxing ring in 1988 or a basketball court in 1984 carry the same historical weight in this calendar? What does this all mean?
What's fascinating here is that it comes back to the concept of the rules of engagement.
Okay.
In society, in the courtroom, or in the mortgage lending office, the rules are often hidden, biased, and structurally designed to exclude.
Right, they invent a $500 bond out of nowhere.
Exactly. The system can just invent a barrier to deny you entry. But the arena, the boxing ring, the basketball court, the cricket pitch, it's a controlled variable.
Oh, I see.
The dimensions are exact. The rules are explicit, universally applied, and highly visible to the public.
A knockout is a knockout.
Mm-hmm.
The referee can't suddenly invent a new rule to negate a left hook just because he doesn't like who threw it.
Exactly. And because the rules were undeniable, these figures forced global society to view Black individuals not merely as marginalized participants, but as absolute masters, directors, and CEOs of their fields.
Wow.
When Jack Johnson defeated Jim Jeffries in the fight of the century, he didn't just win a boxing match. The pseudoscience of the era claimed white physical and intellectual supremacy was an indisputable law of nature.
Right.
Johnson physically battered that myth into submission in front of cameras.
In real time.
Yes. The oppressor's narrative literally could not survive the reality of the knockout.
Because everyone saw it.
Right.
Graph.
It sparked global riots because the cognitive dissonance for the establishment was just too somewhere.
And John Thompson proved that the mastery wasn't just physical. By standing on the sidelines with his trademark towel over his shoulder, dictating complex strategies, he proved organizational and intellectual dominance.
He was the architect of the victory.
And Constantine is the perfect bridge then.
He is. He took the undeniable mastery he achieved on the cricket pitch and explicitly converted it into legal and diplomatic power in the courtroom and the House of Lords.
Wow.
These men used the explicit rules of the arena to force legal and social change in a society that relied on implicit bias. They shattered foundational myths on a global stage.
That concept of undeniable physical mastery is a perfect, albeit dark, transition into the next section of the text.
Yes, it is.
Because if you prove your physical dominance in the arena, the oppressive system's historical reaction is to double down on controlling your physical body everywhere else.
We are moving into the fight to maintain basic ownership and sovereignty over one's own body and land.
Right, sovereignty over the physical self and territory.
This is where the calendar explores the rawest mechanisms of control.
The calendar takes us all the way back to March 29th, 1741, detailing the New York slave conspiracy.
A very dark chapter.
A series of unexplained fires broke out across Manhattan, and the text describes how this sparked an absolute paranoid witch hunt. The colonial government cracked down brutally, arresting and executing dozens and detaining over 300 enslaved Africans and poor whites based on rumors of an insurrection.
It was an explosion of hysteria.
Yeah.
And it was driven by the constant underlying colonial terror that the people they enslaved would inevitably rise up.
Now, again, just impartially outlining the text connection here, the author argues that this 1741 event isn't just an isolated tragedy.
Right.
It is an early blueprint for the intense, disproportionate surveillance of Black bodies. The source claims that the specific threat of using this, like pre-crime hysteria to justify sweeping surveillance, persists directly in the modern 2026 deployment of predictive policing algorithms.
The author makes a very direct link. They argue the mechanism is the same even if the technology is different. Right.
In 1741, the algorithm was colonial paranoia and coerced confessions. In 2026, the algorithm is a black box AI fed on decades of biased arrest data.
Right, which then deploys police to specific neighborhoods.
Exactly, based on statistical probabilities of where a crime might happen.
Wow.
The text argues that both systems operate on the assumption that certain bodies are inherently suspect and require preemptive control. It's an utter negation of bodily autonomy.
But immediately following that lack of bodily autonomy, the calendar presents a powerful counter-narrative.
That's a much more triumphant one.
April 1st, 1950. The death of Dr. Charles Drew.
An incredible man.
He's universally recognized as the father of the blood bank. He pioneered the methods for processing and storing blood plasma, which revolutionized emergency medicine and saved countless lives during World War II.
A scientist of world-altering magnitude.
Truly. But the defining moment the text focuses on isn't just his discovery, it's his resignation.
Dr. Drew resigned from his position at the American Red Cross because the armed forces absolutely insisted on segregating the blood of Black and white donors.
And the text positions Dr. Drew as the ultimate historical blueprint for today's medical sovereignty movement.
So unpack that for me. Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does his resignation equate to medical sovereignty?
Because segregating blood plasma has zero scientific or medical basis.
Right. It makes no sense.
Plasma doesn't have a race. The military's policy was a purely ideological tool of social hierarchy and biological insult.
Oh, biological insult.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a way of saying, even in our most desperate hour, we view your biology as fundamentally tainted.
Wow.
By resigning his post, Dr. Drew made the ultimate assertion of bodily and scientific autonomy against a hostile system.
He effectively said, you cannot benefit from the brilliance of my intellect while simultaneously degrading the equality of my biology.
Exactly. His refusal to compromise his dignity for his genius is the ultimate assertion of bodily autonomy. He claimed total sovereignty over his own scientific output and his own humanity.
That is an incredibly powerful ethical stance.
It really is.
And from there, the calendar expands this concept of sovereignty. It zooms out from the sovereignty of the physical body to the sovereignty of the physical land.
Geographic fluidness and decolonization.
Exactly. Because the struggle for the body and the struggle for the land are intimately connected to the diaspora.
Very much so.
We have two key dates illustrating this macro-level sovereignty. First, March 31st, 1917 is Transfer Day in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Right.
This marks the formal handover of the islands from the Danish Empire to the United States.
Shifting the colonial lens.
Yeah, the text notes the landlord changed, but highlights that the fundamental struggle for local autonomy continued. It's a reminder of the diaspora's geographic fluidness, where whole populations were traded like assets on an imperial chessboard.
And contrasted with that, we have April 4th, 1960.
Senegal officially breaks free from French colonial rule.
Yes.
They achieve full independence, led by the philosopher king, Leopold Sédar Senghor.
Senghor is a massive figure here.
So let me test an analogy on you to see if I'm grasping the text in nuance here.
Yeah.
Looking at Transfer Day in the Virgin Islands versus independence in Senegal.
Okay, let's hear it.
It feels like, imagine you are renting a house with an abusive landlord under the Danish colonial system.
Okay.
On Transfer Day, the house is sold to a new American landlord. The management changes, but you are still just a tenant with no equity.
Right, you're still renting.
But in Senegal, in 1960, you finally secure the deed to the house yourself. You own it. And more importantly, you finally get to decide exactly how to decorate the interior.
Oh, that analogy is brilliant, particularly that final point about decorating the interior,
Yeah.
because that speaks directly to the core philosophy that the text links to Senghor and Senegal,
Hmm.
the concept of negritude.
I'm not deeply familiar with Negritude. How does it connect to decorating the house?
Well, Senghor was a foundational theorist of negritude. The text explicitly states that Senegal's approach to independence prioritized this concept, which is defined as the cultural and psychological reclamation of Black identity and heritage.
Okay.
To use your analogy, negritude is the profound realization that while the French may have finally handed over the deed to the physical territory,
Or left all their stuff inside.
exactly, they left all of their oppressive intellectual furniture inside the house.
Ah, the education system, the language of governance, the standard of beauty, the historical narrative.
Precisely. The colonial project was designed to make the colonized view themselves through the degrading lens of the colonizer.
Right.
True sovereignty, therefore, isn't just owning the physical borders of the nation, it's decolonizing the mind.
You have to clear out the intellectual furniture of the oppressor.
Yes,
Yeah.
you have to reclaim your history, your art, and your inherent value independent of the European gaze. If you own the land but you still evaluate your worth using the metrics of the people who enslaved you, you aren't truly free.
That is a staggering concept. You have to secure the physical borders of the nation, but you also have to secure the psychological borders of the self.
Exactly.
And that perfectly tees up the final major theme of the calendar.
Mm.
Because once you have reclaimed your mind and territory,
Once you know exactly who you are,
you have to project that new identity out into the world. You do that through culture and ultimately by demanding absolute equity.
you have to establish a new cultural frequency.
Section 5 of our deep dive, the frequencies of revolution, culture, economics, and the mountaintop.
The final stretch.
The text highlights 3 absolute cultural titans in the calendar to demonstrate how vibe and voice become vehicles for global change. Let's start with April 3rd, 1930.
Monumental day.
Rastafari is proclaimed Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. The text refers to him by his title, the Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah.
The coronation of Haile Selassie was a global media event. It sparked a profound shift in Pan-African identity, eventually leading to the global Rastafarian movement.
The source notes that in an era where almost the entire African continent was carved up and subjugated by European powers, the image of an uncolonized sovereign African emperor tracing his lineage back to the biblical King Solomon.
It provided a massive psychological anchor.
And a majestic historical counter-narrative to the imagery of colonial subjugation.
Right. He proved that African royalty and statecraft were not things of the past, but living realities. It was a global projection of divine Black sovereignty.
Then the calendar moves to a completely different kind of frequency. April 2nd, 1939, the birth of Marvin Gaye.
Yes.
The text maps his incredible transition from the polished pop of Motown to the raw, revolutionary social gospel of his album, What's Going On.
He bridged the gap between secular soul music and spiritual political activism.
The text explicitly says Marvin Gaye proved that vibe can be a vehicle for revolution.
It's a very modern phrasing, but it's devastatingly accurate.
It really is. He didn't just write protest lyrics. He used the entire sonic landscape, the layered vocals, the jazz instrumentation, the melancholy groove, to force society to confront the Vietnam War, urban poverty, and environmental decay.
He made the revolution something you could feel in your bones.
Yeah.
He infiltrated the cultural subconscious. You know, you might not read a political pamphlet, but you would put on that record and the frequency of the protest would just wash over you.
And rounding out this cultural trinity is April 4th, 1928, the birth of Maya Angelou.
The global matriarch.
Right. A text bestows 2 incredible titles upon her, the global matriarch and the griot of the chain.
For context, for those who might not know, a griot is a traditional West African storyteller, historian, musician, and poet.
Okay.
They are the living, breathing keepers of the oral tradition and the genealogy of the people.
And the author argues that Angelou functioned as the modern griot for the global diaspora. Through her autobiographies and her poetry, she proved that our stories are the thread that makes the community unbreakable.
Her voice, with all its distinct cadence and authority, became the literal frequency of resilience.
So if we synthesize them, Selassie provided the sovereign anchor.
Right.
Gaye provided the sonic heartbeat of the struggle.
Yeah.
And Angelou provided the narrative thread that wove the history together.
They established a cultural frequency that was so powerful, so globally pervasive, that it could not be jammed or silenced by structural exclusion.
Which brings us, solemnly to the culmination of the calendar.
The final sequence.
And it brings the deep dive back to today's date, April 3rd, and tomorrow's date, April 4th, the final mandate.
The sequence that redefined the modern era.
On April 3rd, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his final speech in Memphis, Tennessee. I've been to the mountaintop.
A profound speech.
The text deeply analyzes this specific moment. It describes this speech and the Memphis sanitation strike he was there to support as a massive pivot.
It was.
The movement was shifting heavily toward economic justice and the Poor People's Campaign. The calendar calls this speech his spiritual last will and testament, focusing intensely on the promised land of economic sovereignty.
He was moving from demanding the theoretical rights we discussed earlier, like the 15th Amendment, to demanding a fundamental restructuring of the economic realities that keep people impoverished regardless of the laws on the books.
But then, the very next day, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King is assassinated.
Right.
The text describes this as a massive breaking of the chain that sent shockwaves globally, sparking violent rebellions in over 100 cities.
A profound generational trauma to the global diaspora.
But here is where I need you to help me untangle the author's logic, because I'm struggling with a massive paradox in the text.
Okay, what is it?
Well, the calendar calls his assassination a breaking the chain. That makes perfect sense. A vital link was destroyed. But in the very next analytical paragraph, it says his death forced a transition to a mandate. It claims his physical end forced the diaspora to take up the mantle of economic and political self-reliance.
Right.
How can a traumatic break in the chain simultaneously be a continuation and an expansion of the chain?
This raises an important question, and honestly, it is the most complex philosophical argument in the entire source text. It touches on network theory as much as it touches on history.
Okay, unpack the paradox for me. How does a broken chain become a mandate?
Well, the physical man, Dr. King, the central, unifying, incredibly charismatic leader who could mobilize hundreds of thousands, he was removed.
Right.
The literal chain of his lifetime, his direct top-down leadership, was violently broken. And the text does not minimize that trauma at all.
No, it's devastating.
But it argues that this horrific break exposed a structural vulnerability in the movement itself.
The vulnerability of centralization.
Exactly. While King was alive, there was a natural tendency for the broader public to rely on the man.
He was the focal point.
He was the chief negotiator, the universal symbol. But when he was assassinated, it became horrifyingly clear to the diaspora that relying on a single, centralized leader was a fatal strategic flaw. Ooh. If the oppressive system can assassinate the leader, they can assassinate the movement.
So the break forced a strategic pivot out of sheer necessity.
Yes. His physical end forced the entire movement to decentralize. The diaspora realized they could no longer wait for a charismatic leader to save them.
They had to step up.
They had to transition from relying on the man to internalizing his final mandate. That urgent call for economic sovereignty and local power he made on April 3rd.
Which meant what, practically?
It meant that every individual citizen, every local organizer, every business owner had to become a leader in their own community.
Wow. So the assassination, while a tragedy, inadvertently forced a massive multiplication.
Exactly.
It turned a centralized chain reliant on one heavy link into a vast, interconnected, decentralized network. A network where every individual is a crucial node.
Exactly. And that interconnected, decentralized network is the very calendar we are studying today. The history ceased being about single messianic figures and became about the collective activation of millions of individuals.
That is an incredibly profound way to interpret historical trauma. It completely changes how I view these events.
It's powerful.
And it brings this entire journey full circle. We have covered an immense, staggering amount of intellectual and historical ground today.
We truly have. We've traced the evolution of an entire people's struggle for existence and sovereignty.
To you, listening right now, I want you to think about the vast architecture we just walked through, all contained within a single week of dates.
7 days.
We started with the sheer intellectual brilliance of Olaudah Equiano, proving his humanity to the Enlightenment, and Carter G. Woodson demanding we actively remember it.
Right.
We navigated the maddening legal labyrinth of the Ohio Black laws and the $500 bond of structural exclusion, while simultaneously witnessing Thomas Mundy Peterson immediately activating the 15th Amendment.
We watched pioneers defy earthly gravity entirely, from Caribbean pilots in biplanes to Captain Dwight pushing toward the stars.
While titans like Jack Johnson and John Thompson shattered the myths of white supremacy in the undeniable, brilliantly lit space of the arena.
Exactly.
We explored the deeply ethical demand for bodily sovereignty, with Dr. Charles Drew refusing to let his blood plasma science be segregated, and we grasped the profound necessity of psychological decolonization.
Clearing out the oppressor's intellectual furniture.
Exactly, with Senghor's Negritude in Senegal. And finally, we rode the frequencies of revolution with Maya Angelou, Marvin Gaye, and Emperor Selassie, culminating in the decentralized mandate left by Dr. King on this very day in 1968.
It is a complex, living, breathing architecture of liberation.
And the ultimate lesson of this text, the reason we took this deep dive on this specific date, April 3rd, 2026, is to prove that history is not a static spreadsheet of trivia to be memorized.
No, it's not.
It is an active operating system. And you, listening today, are an active node on that network. The rights you have today are the direct result of someone else activating them in the past.
Which leaves us with a vital, deeply personal question to consider as we close.
Let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time analyzing Thomas Mundy Peterson, the man who walked into a polling place the very day after the 15th Amendment was ratified.
Right.
He proved the text's central thesis. Progress only exists when it is exercised. An unused right is functionally dead.
Right.
Building on the author's warnings about the evolution of structural exclusion, you know, how the $500 bond evolved into algorithmic voter purges and digital privacy violations.
Like the modern bricks.
I want you to examine your own life and the specific society you navigate in 2026. Look at your digital footprint, your local civic engagement, your economic power.
Ask yourself what you're doing.
Exactly. What hard-won rights or deeply powerful dormant capacities do you possess right now that are slowly expiring simply because you haven't chosen to exercise them today?